7:23 a.m., a Thursday morning in October.
You are not on the brand.
A man in a $6,000 coat fired a single mother in front of 30 witnesses.
I'm not interested in your son.
She folded her apron. She did not cry. She walked out. What he didn't know was who had been sitting on the third stool. The bell above the door at Brennan's Corner Diner rang at 6:47 in the morning on a Thursday in late October, and the man who walked in did not look like a man worth noticing. Gray hoodie, the cuffs gone soft at the edges, jeans with a fray at the right knee that had been there long enough to look natural, brown boots with salt stains across the toes from a winter that had not yet arrived. He pulled the hood off his head and stood by the door for a moment, taking in the room the way a person does when he has been to a lot of places that look almost, but not exactly like this one. The diner was a long room with a counter on the right and red vinyl booths on the left. 8 stools at the counter. 12 booths along the windows that looked out onto Carson Street, where the buses ran every 14 minutes from the Liberty Bridge into the south side of Pittsburgh. The floor was checkered black and white linoleum that had been replaced once in 1987 and never again. The ceiling fans turned slow. He sat at the counter on the third stool from the end. Margaret Whitfield brought him a mug before he asked for 41 years old. 17 years at Brennan's. She poured the coffee black because that was what he looked like he wanted. And she had been right about that kind of thing for so long now that she did not bother asking anymore. She slid the mug across the counter with the handle turned toward his right hand. She set down a small white pitcher of cream beside it that he would not use. She watched him for half a second, the way she watched everyone, and then she turned and tore the order pad out of her apron pocket. "What can I get you, honey?" 2 eggs over easy. Wheat toast. No butter, bacon, or sausage. "No, ma'am." "Just the eggs." She wrote it down. She tore the slip. She clipped it to the wheel above the pass-through window and gave the bell a tap with the side of her finger, because the cook, Earl, did not look up unless you tapped the bell. He had been there since 1996. He was deaf in the left ear from the fryer. The man at the counter wrapped both hands around the coffee mug and did not drink from it. He just held it. He watched the steam rise up off the surface and bend toward the ceiling fan and disappear into the moving air. His shoulders dropped maybe half an inch. Margaret refilled the mug of the man, 2 seats down without being asked. She topped off the older woman in the corner booth, who had been there since 5:50 and would stay until 8:15, the way she did every weekday, because her husband had died in February and the apartment was too quiet in the morning. Margaret knew this without ever having been told. She knew it. The way she knew Earl took his coffee with 3 sugars, and that the bus driver, named Curtis, who came in on Tuesdays had a daughter at Pitt, and that the man on the third stool had not slept the night before, because his eyes had that flat thing in them that comes from not sleeping. He looked up at her once when she came back around with the pot. She smiled at him. It was not a customer service smile. It was the smile of a woman who had been on her feet since 5:15 and had decided a long time ago that the cost of being kind was lower than the cost of not being kind. And she had stuck with that math through everything that had come after. "You good, sweetheart?" "Yes, ma'am. Thank you." She moved on. He still had not touched the coffee. He was watching her now, not in the way a man watches a woman, in the way a person watches a thing he has not seen often enough to recognize on sight. He was watching the way she moved between the booths and the counter without ever making a wasted step, the way she carried 4 plates on her left arm and a coffee pot in her right hand, and never once looked down at them to make sure they were balanced. The way she said good morning to a man in a Steelers cap, and the man's whole face changed for a second before he remembered to be tired again. She came back through the pass with his plate. 2 eggs. Wheat toast. The yolks, the exact color of yolks that had been broken at the right moment by someone who had been breaking eggs for a long time. She set it down in front of him. She set down a small ramekin of strawberry jam that he had not asked for. "In case you change your mind on the butter," she said. He looked at the jam. He looked up at her. "Thank you." She was already gone. The bell above the door rang again at 7:23. 3 men walked in. The one in front, the kind of tall that comes from money rather than genetics. The height a man carries when he has never once had to bend down to fit into a place. Charcoal overcoat. The collar of the coat turned up against a cold that was not actually cold yet. Black hair combed straight back. A watch on his left wrist that caught the fluorescent light when he raised his arm to push the door open all the way. The 2 men behind him were younger, both of them holding tablets, both of them dressed in versions of what the first man was wearing, but cheaper, the way junior officers wear versions of the general's uniform. The man at the counter watched them come in. Margaret looked up from the register, and her face did something it had not done all morning. Not fear, not even surprise. Something quieter than that. The face of a person who has been expecting a visit and has just realized the visit is happening now, and that the morning she had been having up until this point is over. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "Maggie." He did not stop at the counter. He walked past her without looking at her and took the booth in the back corner, the one nobody ever sat in because it was under the broken air vent. He slid in. The 2 younger men slid in opposite him. He set his phone face down on the table. He did not take off his coat. He looked up at Margaret like he was surprised. She was still standing there. "We'll have 3 coffees. And give us a minute with the menu, Maggie. I want to talk about what we're going to do with this menu." She nodded. She went behind the counter. She took 3 mugs down from the shelf. Her hands did not shake. The man at the 3rd stool watched them not shake. He watched her pour the coffee at the same speed she had poured his, no faster, no slower. He watched her load the 3 mugs onto a tray and walk them back to the corner booth and set them down one by one in front of each man. The handles turned toward their right hands. The cream pitcher in the center of the table. "Thank you, Maggie. Now sit down." "Sir, sit down. I want you to hear this." She sat. The man at the 3rd stool turned slightly on his seat. Not enough to make it obvious. Enough. Vincent Caldwell Pierce III opened a folder on the table between them. He did not look at the folder. He looked at Margaret. "You've been with Brennan's how long?" 17 years in February. 17 years. And in 17 years, has anyone ever sat you down and told you what this brand is going to look like in 2026? "No, sir." "Of course not. Because for 17 years, this brand has not had a vision. It has had a building and a fryer, and a woman named Maggie who pours coffee. That is not a brand. That is a habit. And habits do not survive the next decade of American hospitality, Maggie. Habits get bought out and turned into parking lots." She did not respond. He did not seem to want her to. Meridian Hospitality purchased the Brennan's chain in August. We acquired 14 locations across Pennsylvania. The intent, as I have explained to your manager, who has clearly failed to explain it to you, is to reposition this footprint as elevated American comfort dining. New menu, new price point, new uniform, new experience. The customer who walks into a Brennan's in 2026 will be paying $24 for a burger, and they will expect to be served by someone who reflects that price point. He let that sit. The 2 younger men did not look up from their tablets. "You are not on the brand, Maggie." The man at the counter set his coffee mug down on the saucer without making any sound at all. "Sir," Margaret said, "it is nothing personal. I want you to understand that. I have nothing against you as a human being. I am sure you are a very fine human being. But this is a business decision, and the business has decided that the woman who has been pouring coffee at this counter for 17 years is not the woman who is going to be pouring coffee at this counter in March. Sir, my son is. I am not interested in your son, Maggie. I am sure your son is a wonderful child. I do not get to make business decisions based on whose son needs what. If I did that, I would not have a business. I would have a charity, and nobody invests in charities." The man at the counter did not move. Earl, at the pass-through window, had stopped working. He was standing very still with a spatula in his hand and a slice of bacon on the grill behind him going from done to overdone, and he was looking at the corner booth with the kind of look a man gets on his face when he is deciding whether to walk over there and do something he would later regret. The older woman in the corner booth had set her fork down. The bus driver named Curtis at the counter had turned all the way around on his stool. Vincent Pierce did not notice any of this. He was looking at the folder. There is one more thing, and I want to be straightforward with you about it, Maggie, because I think you and I are both straightforward people. There has been a report. It came up in the inventory audit last week. The kitchen has been losing approximately $42 a week in food costs that cannot be accounted for through standard waste. That's the day-old bread, sir. Mr. Brennan, let us take. Mr. Brennan does not own this diner anymore, Maggie. Sir, I am going to need to see what is in your bag. The diner went quiet, not the quiet of a room where nobody is talking, the other kind. The kind where everyone is talking inside their own head at once, and nobody can hear themselves think over the volume of it. Margaret looked at him. Sir, she said. Maggie, the bag, on the floor by the register. I am asking you to bring it over here and show me what is inside it. In front of these gentlemen. In front of the customers. Because I would rather we handle this here with witnesses than have it become something it does not need to become. She did not move for a moment. The man at the counter was looking down at his plate now. His hands were flat on the surface of the counter, on either side of the plate, palms down, fingers slightly spread, the way a man's hands rest when he is making a deliberate decision not to clench them. Margaret stood up. She walked to the register. She picked up her bag. It was a canvas tote with the logo of the Carnegie Library on the side, faded from years of being washed. She walked back to the booth. She set the bag on the table in front of Vincent Pierce. She unzipped it herself. She turned it, so the opening faced him. Inside the bag, on top, wrapped in a paper napkin, was half of a turkey club sandwich. The bread was the bread from the kitchen. The turkey was the turkey from the kitchen. The napkin had Brennan's printed on it in faded green ink. Underneath the sandwich was a child's book, a library book, the clear plastic cover catching the light. The title was not visible from where the man at the counter was sitting, but it had a picture of a small boy on the front, holding a stethoscope to a stuffed bear's chest. Underneath the book was a folded piece of paper that looked like a hospital invoice. Vincent Pierce looked at the contents of the bag. He looked up at Margaret. Whose sandwich is that, Maggie? It's mine, sir. You are taking a sandwich home from the kitchen. It's the lunch special from yesterday, sir, Mr. Brennan said. Mr. Brennan does not own this diner. She did not answer this time. She had answered it once. Pierce closed the bag. He pushed it back across the table toward her with 2 fingers, the way a man pushes, a thing he does not want to touch any more than he has to. Maggie, I want you to take off your apron. I want you to put your apron on this table. I want you to take your bag and walk out the front door of this establishment. Your 2 final weeks of compensation will be forfeit under the brand standards violation clause of your employment agreement, which I assume you have not read, but which you signed in 2008, and which is still in effect. You will receive a final pay stub in the mail. We will not be providing a reference. Margaret did not cry. The man at the counter noticed this. She untied the apron. She lifted it over her head. She folded it once, lengthwise, and then once again the short way, and she set it on the table next to the folder. Vincent Pierce had not opened. She picked up her bag. She zipped it closed. She straightened. Thank you for 17 years, Mr. Pierce. You're welcome, Maggie. He said it without looking up. She walked out from behind the table. She walked past the counter. She walked past the 3rd stool. She did not look at the man sitting on it. She did not look at anyone. She went through the front door and the bell above it rang. And the door closed behind her, and the diner held its breath for the space of 3 seconds, and then went back to the sound of a fan and a fryer, and a coffee pot, finishing its drip. The man at the counter picked up his coffee. He took 1 sip. He set the mug back down. He reached into the right pocket of his hoodie. He took out a small black billfold. He took out a 20 and a 5 and laid them flat on the counter beside his plate. He took out a business card and a pen. The card was a producer's card, not his own. The name on the card was Stephen Hamel. The company on the card was Company Zero Productions. On the back of the card, he wrote 4 words. Call me before, signed it, with a single letter, K. He slid the card under the saucer so the corner stuck out. He slid the cash on top of the card. He stood up. He pulled the hoodie back up over his head. He walked to the front door. The bell rang. The door closed. He was gone before anyone in the diner had said a word. Earl came out from behind the pass-through with the spatula still in his hand. He walked to the counter. He picked up the card. He read it. He read it again. He looked at the door. Holy Mother of God, Earl said. The 2 young men in the corner booth, who had not looked up from their tablets the entire time, now looked up. The older woman in the corner booth stood up, dropped a 10 on the table, and walked out without finishing her eggs. Curtis, the bus driver, said, very quietly, Was that? Don't, Earl said. Just don't. Vincent Pierce was looking around the diner now, like a man who has just realized the room has been watching him, and is trying to decide whether the watching matters. It did not matter yet. At 11:14 that morning, Vincent Caldwell Pierce III was sitting in the back of a black SUV on the Fort Pitt Bridge when his phone rang. The screen said, Halloran R., CEO Meridian. He answered on the second ring. Roger, Vincent, where are you? Bridge, heading to the Squirrel Hill location for the 11:30 walkthrough. Skip it, come to the office. Roger the schedule, Vincent. Stephen Hamel called me 40 minutes ago from Company Zero. He had questions about our staffing protocols at the Carson Street location. There was a silence on the line that lasted long enough for Vincent to count the cables on the bridge as the SUV passed under them. He counted 4. I don't know who that is, Roger. Vincent. Company Zero is the production company that signed our catering contract in July, the $8.4 million contract. The contract that is currently funding our payroll for the next 2 quarters. Stephen Hamel is the producer who countersigned it. He is in a meeting right now with our legal counsel discussing the morality clause in Section 9 of that contract. Do you remember Section 9 of that contract, Vincent? Vincent did not remember Section 9 of that contract. Get to my office. Roger, listen, whatever happened, get to my office. The line went dead. The driver of the SUV looked at Vincent in the rearview mirror. Vincent did not look back. He was looking out the side window at the Monongahela River and trying to remember what he had said to a waitress 2.5 hours earlier, and whether anything he had said could possibly been heard by anyone who would have any reason to care. He could not remember exactly what he had said. He remembered the bag. He remembered the boy on the cover of the book. His phone buzzed once. A text from one of the 2 young men who had been sitting opposite him at Brennan's that morning. The young man's name was Tyler. The text said, Just heard from corporate. There's a video. Here Vincent Pierce closed his eyes. There was no video. There had not been a video. What there had been was a man in a gray hoodie on the 3rd stool of the counter who had not lifted a phone, had not made a recording, had not done anything that any reasonable person would have noticed. There had been Earl with a spatula. There had been Curtis the bus driver. There had been an older woman who had been coming to that diner every weekday morning for 9 years and who had walked out at 7:41 that morning without finishing her breakfast. There had been 31 customers in total, and every single one of them had watched a woman fold an apron and lay it down and walk out the front door without crying. There had been a card with 4 words on it, written in the careful hand of a man who had been writing notes to other people his whole life and had learned the value of writing short ones. That was all. That was enough. The receptionist at Company Zero Productions did not look up when Vincent Pierce walked in at 2:14 that afternoon because she had been told not to. He sat in a chair in the lobby for 31 minutes. He was not offered coffee. He was not offered water. At 2:45, a woman in a black blazer came out of the inner hallway and said, Mr. Pierce, they're ready for you. She did not say who they were. He followed her down a hallway with photographs on the walls from films he had never seen and 1 or 2 he half remembered. They turned left at the end of the hallway. She opened a door. She stepped aside. The room was a conference room. Long table, 12 chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the Allegheny. At the far end of the table, in the chair that faced the door, sat a man in a gray hoodie. The hood was down now. The hair was a little messy from the hood, having been up earlier. The face was the face from the third stool of Brennan's Corner Diner that morning. The face was also a Vincent Pierce had seen on the side of buses, on the side of bus stops, on streaming service banners, on every poster outside, every multiplex, on every Friday night for the last 30 years. The face was Keanu Reeves's face. The face had been Keanu Reeves's face the whole time. Vincent Pierce stood in the doorway. Keanu did not stand up. He did not extend a hand. He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Mr. Pierce, please sit." Vincent sat. There were two other people in the room. A woman to Keanu's left in a suit, a binder in front of her. A man to Keanu's right with a yellow legal pad and a pen, and the kind of face that does not change for any reason. Nobody introduced anyone. "I was at the counter this morning," Keanu said. "On the third stool. You probably didn't see me. Mr. Reeves, I'm not finished, Mr. Pierce. I want to ask you a question. The question is going to sound simple, but I'd like you to take a moment with it. The question is, why did you ask to see her bag? It was a brand audit, Mr. Reeves. There had been an inventory discrepancy, $42. I'm sorry. $42 a week, your inventory discrepancy. That was the number, wasn't it? Yes. I want to ask you another question, Mr. Pierce. How much did Meridian Hospitality pay your firm to acquire the Brennan's chain in August? That information is $11.6 million for 14 locations. I have the filing in front of me. Keanu did not look down at any filing. $11.6 million to acquire 14 restaurants. And you fired a woman who has been at the same restaurant for 17 years, in front of 30 customers, because the kitchen was losing $42 a week on a sandwich the previous owner had specifically authorized the staff to take home. Mr. Pierce, is that an accurate summary? Mr. Reeves, with respect, there is a legitimate business. I'm going to stop you, Mr. Pierce, because the word respect is doing a lot of work in that sentence, and I want to ask you about the work it's doing. Did you respect her? When you asked her to open her bag, in front of her co-workers, in front of her customers, when you used the word charity to describe what it would mean to consider that she has a child. Did you respect her at that moment, Mr. Pierce? Yes or no? Vincent Pierce did not answer. I'll move on, Mr. Pierce. 3 weeks ago, you terminated a 61-year-old line cook named Eleanor Marsh from your Wilkinsburg location. The reason listed on the termination paperwork was failure to align with culinary brand direction. Miss Marsh had been the head cook at that location for 22 years. She is currently uninsured. Her husband had a stroke in September. Are you familiar with her situation, Mr. Pierce? I have a lot of locations, Mr. Reeves. 2 weeks before that, you declined to hire a veteran named James Doyle at your Bloomfield location. Mr. Doyle has a facial scar from an IED in Helmand Province. The hiring manager at Bloomfield wanted to bring him on. You overrode the hiring manager. The note in the file says the scar was inconsistent with the warm hospitality aesthetic. Are you familiar with that note, Mr. Pierce? That is being mischaracterized. Last month, you demoted a woman named Rosalind Tanner from manager to server at your Squirrel Hill location after she filed an internal complaint about your new break time policy. Are you familiar with Miss Tanner, Mr. Pierce? Vincent Pierce was no longer answering. He was looking down at the table. Mr. Pierce. Keanu's voice did not change. It had not changed once during the entire conversation. It was the same voice that had ordered 2 eggs over easy at 6:47 in the morning. Section 9 of the catering contract between Meridian Hospitality Holdings and Company Zero Productions includes a morality and conduct clause. Our legal counsel has reviewed the events of this morning. Their reading is that the events of this morning constitute a material breach. The contract is, as of this afternoon, terminated. The woman in the suit to Keanu's left turned a page of her binder. $8.4 million, Keanu said, effective immediately. Vincent Pierce looked up. Mr. Reeves, I'm not finished. Mr. Pierce, there's one more thing, and I'd like you to listen carefully to this part. Because this part is not a business decision. This part is personal." He paused. "Margaret Whitfield has a son. His name is Caleb. He is 8 years old. He has a congenital heart condition called tetralogy of Fallot. He is scheduled for a second corrective surgery at Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh in 11 days. The remaining cost not covered by his mother's insurance is $73,419. As of 1 hour ago, that balance has been paid. In full, anonymously, through a foundation that has no relationship to me on paper, but which I have funded since 2009 under my late sister's name." Vincent Pierce did not move. "You did not know any of that, Mr. Pierce. You could not have known any of that. I want to be clear about that. You did not fire her because of her son. You fired her because you did not consider, even for 1 second, that she might have one. That is the part I want you to sit with. Not the part where it turned out she did. The part where it didn't occur to you to ask." The room was quiet. "You can go now, Mr. Pierce." Vincent Pierce sat in the chair for another moment. Then he stood up. He looked at Keanu. He opened his mouth to say something. He closed it. He turned. He walked out of the conference room. The door closed behind him with a soft click. That was the loudest sound he heard for the rest of that day. Roger Halloran terminated Vincent Pierce's employment at 4:47 that afternoon by certified letter delivered to his hotel room at the Fairmont. The Meridian Board met in emergency session that evening and voted to suspend the Brennan's rebrand initiative pending an internal review. The review took 6 weeks. The review concluded that the $11.6 million acquisition had been mismanaged from the beginning and recommended that the chain be sold back to a regional buyer at a loss. The chain was sold in February. The buyer was a consortium of 3 former Brennan's managers and a silent investor whose name did not appear on any of the paperwork. Margaret Whitfield was rehired at the Carson Street location on the 1st of March. She was given the title of general manager. The pay raise was substantial. She did not know about the silent investor. She did know that her son's surgery had been paid for. She had received a letter on October 24th from a foundation called the Keanu Reeves Memorial Trust, which informed her that her son's medical expenses had been covered in full, and which asked her not to write back, because the foundation did not maintain a public correspondence file. She had read the letter 3 times. She had put it in the kitchen drawer next to the bills. She had sat at the kitchen table for a long time and not said anything to anyone. She had not cried then either. Caleb's surgery was successful. He came home on the 11th day after the operation. He could climb the stairs by Christmas. By February, his cardiologist said he was doing better than the surgical team had hoped. Margaret never saw the man from the 3rd stool again. She thought about him sometimes. She thought about the way he had held the coffee mug with both hands and not drunk from it. The way he had said, "Thank you," when she set down the jam. The way he had not looked at her when she walked out the front door that morning, which she had taken at the time as one more small cruelty, and which she understood later was the opposite of that. He had been giving her the dignity of being unobserved at the worst moment of her life. He had been the only person in that room who had understood that watching was a kind of harm. She did not tell anyone what she suspected. Earl knew. Curtis knew. The older woman from the corner booth, whose name turned out to be Helen, knew. The 4 of them had a kind of agreement that was never spoken out loud. They did not bring it up. They did not confirm it to anyone who asked. When a reporter from the Post-Gazette came around in December asking questions about the rumor, all 4 of them said they did not know what she was talking about. Vincent Pierce did not work in hospitality again. He moved back to Greenwich. He took a position with a private equity firm. He did not speak publicly about Brennan's, or about Pittsburgh, or about the morning of October 17th. He told his wife, eventually, that he had been let go over a contract dispute. He did not tell her about the bag. He did not tell her about the boy on the cover of the book. He told himself, for a long time, that he had been doing his job, that the woman should have read her employment agreement, that the brand had needed repositioning, that the inventory discrepancy had been a legitimate concern, that the timing had been unfortunate, but the decision had been correct. He told himself this for almost 2 years. In September of the second year, he was in a hotel in Charlotte for a conference, and he was at the breakfast buffet at 6:50 in the morning. And the woman who refilled his coffee was a woman in her 60s whose name tag said, Doreen, and she said, "Good morning, sweetheart, tot," to him in the same exact voice that Margaret Whitfield had used at 6:47 in the morning on a Thursday in late October, and Vincent Pierce stood at the buffet station and held a white coffee cup in both hands and did not drink from it, and then he set the cup down very carefully on the saucer, and he walked back to his table, and he sat down, and he put both hands flat on the table on either side of the plate, palms down, fingers slightly spread, and he understood, for the first time, that he had not been doing his job. He had been deciding who was allowed to be a person in front of him. He had been deciding it every day, in every room, with every employee, with every server, with every driver, with every cleaner. Since he had been 22 years old, he had been deciding it on the basis of the watch he was wearing, and the room he was standing in, and the height he carried into a doorway. He had been deciding it without ever once asking himself whether he was the kind of person who got to decide. He sat at the table in the hotel restaurant in Charlotte for 40 minutes. He did not eat anything. He paid the bill. He left. He did not change after that. People do not change in one morning. He went back to work. He went back to his life. He did not become a different man in any dramatic way. But every morning after that, when a woman in an apron poured him coffee in a hotel restaurant or a diner or a cafeteria, he said her name back to her if her name was on a tag. And he said, "Thank you," and he tipped at the level his accountant had once told him was excessive. And he did this every day for the rest of his working life, not because anyone was watching, because he had finally understood that the not watching was the test and that he had failed it. In front of 30 witnesses, on a Thursday morning in October, in a diner on Carson Street in the city of Pittsburgh, and the man in the gray hoodie had been on the third stool, and the coffee in the mug had been going cold, and Margaret Whitfield had been folding her apron lengthwise and then the short way, and laying it down on the table next to a folder that nobody had opened. There are about 300 million people in this country, and the vast majority of them, on any given morning, are pouring coffee for someone who has not asked their name, or driving a bus for someone who has not asked their name, or cleaning a hallway for someone who has not asked their name. We have built a country where the work of holding everything together is done almost entirely by people whose names are not asked, and we have built ourselves the comfortable habit of not asking them. The cruelty of what Vincent Pierce did to Margaret Whitfield was not in the firing. The firing was a small part of it. The cruelty was in the assumption that he could do it without consequence, because the woman in front of him was a kind of person that the world had agreed, by long and silent custom, did not require consideration. He was wrong about that. Somebody was watching. Somebody is always watching, not in the way that frightens you, but in the way that matters. The person on the third stool, the woman in the corner booth, the cook with the spatula, the bus driver turning on his stool, the 8-year-old boy at home in a hospital gown, drawing a picture of his mother in crayon on the back of a placement. She will tape to a refrigerator that does not yet exist in a kitchen, that will have west-facing windows and good afternoon light. Somebody is watching, and somebody is keeping count, and the count comes due eventually. Not always in the way Vincent Pierce found out. Often more quietly. Often without the person who did the harm ever knowing it has come back to find them. But it comes. If this story made you think about the person who poured your coffee this morning, send it to someone who needs to hear it. If it made you uncomfortable, sit with that. The discomfort is information, and the next time a woman in an apron sets down a plate in front of you and turns the handle of the mug toward your right hand, look up, ask her name, say it back.